Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this important conversation about LGBTQ plus mental health. I'm Dana Pickley. I'm the managing director of News is Out, and I am honored to be your host for today's event. If this is your first introduction to News is Out, welcome. We are a collaboration of 7 of the nation's leading local queer media publishers. That's Bay Area Reporter, Dallas Voice, Los Angeles Blade, Philadelphia Gay News, Tag Magazine, Washington Blade, and Windy City Times. This week is National LGBTQ plus Health Awareness Week, which celebrates 23 years in 2025. Right now, our community is facing unprecedented mental health challenges, from the impact of discrimination and trauma to barriers to accessing gender-affirming care. The need of support and understanding has never been greater. So that's why we're here, to have an open conversation about mental wellness and hopefully equip you with the tools to navigate these challenges. We're thrilled to welcome an incredible panel of experts who have dedicated their careers to mental health. Dr. Petros Levounis, the immediate past president of the American Psychiatric Association, or you may know it as APA. Dr. Christy Hanson, a licensed professional counselor and founder of Hanson Counseling, and Dr. Noel B. Ramirez, a licensed clinical social worker and the director of Mango Tree Counseling. Together, we'll discuss the unique struggles of LGBTQ plus individuals face, share strategies, and answer your questions live. So if you are tuning in on Facebook or YouTube, we encourage you to drop your questions in the comments, and we will do our best to address as many as we can, because your mental wellness matters, and we're so glad you're here. So we are going to get started. So I'm going to bring Dr. Ramirez in here with me. Hello, Dr. Ramirez.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. I want to give a little introduction on you. So, Dr. Ramirez is a Philadelphia-based licensed clinical social worker and public health professional specializing in integrated healthcare, recovery-oriented care, and body positivity. With a doctorate in behavioral health from Arizona State and advanced training in relational psychoanalytical psychotherapy, which that is a big one right there. He focuses on connection, resilience, and advocacy. And since 2009, Dr. Ramirez has led HIV prevention efforts, supported federally qualified health centers, and championed mental health care initiatives for queer Asian Americans. You also teach graduate social work courses and consult on community health programs. What an incredible resume. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Ramirez.
It's my pleasure and honor.
So my first question for you, well, first of all, how are you? I don't think medical professionals get asked enough. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm just, anytime I'm in spaces where there's other queer folks, I just feel like our ancestors are so proud. So I feel really glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much. So what are some of the biggest mental health challenges facing LGBTQ plus individuals today?
Yeah, I think, with the current political climate, at least from my experience and the folks that I'm working with, I feel like we're just experiencing this collective trauma reaction to this core narrative of sickness that has haunted our community for a long time. And so with all the things that's happening with legislation, even in the mental health spaces, I'm noticing some really interesting and frightening things. There's a lot of what we call enactments that are happening in our community. And so collective trauma, this kind of activation. And I think this is an important time for us to come together and take care of each other.
How do intersectional identities, like for instance, being queer and a person of color, affect access to mental health care and the quality of treatment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I often see two things at play. As a queer person of color, I can also say that we're a resilient people. We find ways to make contact and get what we need and resources. And so I see a sort of nuanced resilience in these communities, in our communities. But then I also know that in my own training, the nuances of intersectionality aren't well discussed. There isn't a lot of language to talk about the nuances of collectivist identities and incorporating a very Western queer identity, and so there's a lot that hasn't been discussed and formulated. So often, especially in my group practice, Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting, we often get a lot of reactions to folks feeling misaligned culturally. And so the challenge, I think, is really our training, our lived experiences, and how, as clinicians, mental health clinicians, we really need to step up to include the diaspora in our trainings.
Talk a little bit about Mango Tree. You have your logo behind you as well. So what are you able to provide at Mango Tree that maybe folks aren't getting elsewhere?
Yeah, so Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting started in 2020 with the rise of anti-Asian hate in the U.S. in general, and so it really was championed by the community. I'm really grateful to Philadelphia for giving us some funding to start it. But we are an Asian American mental health group practice that focuses on the nuances of the diaspora, race, identity, gender, sexual orientation. We have an incredibly intersectional staff of 17 clinicians who have lived experiences as Asian American folks, queer folks, folks with disabilities, and we really spend a lot of time really cultivating a new language to feel inclusive and talk about cultural identity as well as mental health. So, yeah.
If somebody in the Philly area wants to reach out to Mango Tree and perhaps seek treatment, what should they do?
Well, you can reach us on our website, mangotreecc.com. You can follow us on Instagram. We're desperately looking for friends at mangotree.counseling. But yeah, or you can just send us an email. We're looking for you. We're here to support.
I know. I think that's great that to say that, because I know a lot of us in this time and this world are looking for resources to be able to access someone like yourself, and it can be tough. It's not always easy. I've had plenty of emails or calls go unanswered, so to know that you're welcoming and you want to hear from people, that's really wonderful.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say, we have community spaces like the William Way Community Center. We collaborate them with the Way Gay Talk Space of last Tuesdays. It's for gay, bi, queer men. And so I think this is a time where I think it's important for us to remember that our communities are looking for each other. We're looking for each other and we're looking to support each other. And this is an opportunity to remember that.
What strategies have you found most effective in helping LGBTQ plus people build resilience? I know we talk about that we are a resilient people, we're a resilient community, but how have you helped your clients?
Yeah, I wish I can say there's a particular psychotherapy modality. A lot of a lot of places like to promote that this is evidence based, but um, no offense to any evidence based interventions out there that are championing things, but I think the most powerful intervention that I've incorporated in our practice um, is a connection to community. We really focus on making sure that you're getting the mental health care that you need and you're also being plugged in. And that's why I think our practice, and just as a practice as a clinician in all the different places that I've worked at, I've always wanted to make sure that we felt connected, because it's those relationships and community and affinity that transform who we are. And so I think, again, with LGBTQIA communities, I know this even personally, I have been transformed by the recovery spaces, affinity spaces, places where I feel like I belong. And so I think having those third spaces, and some of the third spaces are really being challenged right now, and
Yeah.
with our economy and also with everything that's going on, that's where true empowerment and healing begins. And so that would be the best intervention is not doing this by yourself.
I think that's really important to bring up, and obviously Philadelphia, such a community based
Go
place.
Eagles!
Yeah, go Birds. Yeah, but I mean, you've got Philly Gay News there. You've got so much history. But there are people all over this country that don't have anything near what Philadelphia has in terms of community. Do you have any suggestions on maybe how they can find people and places to connect, even if that's something they have to start themselves?
Yeah, the community centers, wherever they are, there's websites. This is actually a topic that comes up a lot in therapy.
Yeah,
Is figuring out how to connect, really dealing with this isolation, and especially post pandemic, we really have spaces have changed, but there are places, right, like that don't have community spaces. So I would say there's virtual communities that connect, like so our clinicians, we work with the William Way Community Center. Shout out to William Way
of
Community Center.
course.
And we do this way gay talk space, and we have people from all around rural Pennsylvania, sometimes from different countries, who come together to talk about healthy intimacy for gay, bi, queer, trans men. And so I think there's some virtual spaces, meetup.com, retreat centers like Easton Mountain, Gala, all these different programs that curate some pretty intense programs that you would have to travel to. But locally, I would, um, I just, I believe very strongly that our communities are always looking for each other. So if
Yes.
you put the sort of, if there's some research and interest, there's always something happening. And so I would encourage folks to search, to connect. Social media has really been such a huge source of information around local community and resources. And so the hashtags, I just learned what that was. You click it and you can find so much information, rabbit holes. But I do think that, well, I will say, like, virtual communities are great, but the face-to-face co-regulation piece is so important for our, like, neurological health and mental health. And so I would encourage a mix of both. But meetup.com is a great resource. I'm not being sponsored by them, but I would say that there's quite a lot of resources that and even LGBTQI professional
Hmm.
associations. I mean, there's plenty of opportunities, but it's hard to take that first step.
I've met a lot of people through meetup groups. You're right. You could find a hiking group, a bowling group, all sorts of things. Any way you can
Yes.
find to get to
French
find that
bulldog
community.
groups.
French, the gay French bulldog groups.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Um, you have worked extensively in HIV prevention and with queer Asian American mental health. What key lessons from that work can be applied more broadly?
It's a great question. Um, and I'll just share that, like, 10 years ago, I oversaw this group for HIV positive gay, bi, queer men. Shout out to St. Christopher's Hospital for Children. And I remember the folks would say, gay, bi, queer men, young men who are living with HIV, good luck recruiting for that. Like, there's so much
Mm.
stigma. But I was blown away. About 100 folks went through our program at different clinics. There was such a hunger to connect. My heart gets warm because on social media, I see these guys who are still friends with one another. Um, there is a deep hunger in our communities, whether it's queer communities, people living with HIV, the recovery community, the AA and HPI communities. We all belong to a diaspora. And I think the one lesson I've learned is when we tap into that hunger of connection and we show up and curate space for that, it's so powerful. And it really is about community connection and feeling a sense of belonging. I think that's one through line I've seen in all the different types of work that I've done, from methadone maintenance to HIV work to working. I oversaw an LGBTQI drop in. Like, there is this deep hunger to connect. And I think as clinicians, as people in the community, it's really, and as elders in the community, it's our responsibility to really create and hold that space and to cultivate that energy.
I've loved talking with you. Thank you so much for these insights. I have one more question before we let you go. What is one message that you want to share with someone in the LGBTQ plus community who's just really struggling with their mental health right now?
It's something I tell myself a lot. And so I just want to remind you that you're a descendant of a community that has endured, has fought to exist, and most importantly, a community that's really looking for you. We're always looking for each other, for better or worse sometimes with those apps, but we're always looking for each other. And I think the sort of through line here is, like, you're not alone, and you belong to a community that's so fierce and awesome, and the ancestors are looking out. So I just want to, that would be my message, is that you belong to a community that's always looking for you.
I love that. Thank you so much. We're even seeing that in our Instagram and Facebook posts. People are talking with each other, sharing information. You are so right. We are always looking for each other. Dr. Ramirez, thank you so much. Tell us one more time where we can find you and where we can follow you on Instagram to help boost that up.
Hi, yeah, so you can check out our website, mangotreecc.com, and you can find us on Instagram, mangotree.counseling. And yeah, we're in the Philadelphia metro area, but we service Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So we're here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramirez. Have the best rest of your day.
Thank you.
Oops. There we go. All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for all of you that are tuning in for this live, and hope if you don't catch it live, you can watch it on our YouTube channel or Facebook live videos for at least the next 30 days there. We are going to be bringing on our next guest. All right, Dr. Hanson, I'm going to be bringing you on. Hello, Dr. Hanson.
Hello.
So nice of you to be here with me and all of us today. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
I appreciate you having me.
Well, I'm going to do a little intro for you, and then we'll get started with some questions. So, Dr. Christy Hanson is a licensed professional counselor in Texas, specializing in anxiety, depression, LGBTQIA plus issues, couples conflicts, teen therapy, and parent coaching. With a focus on building authentic connections, which we were just talking about, Dr. Hanson helps clients cultivate self-compassion and develop stronger, more fulfilling relationships. By bringing experience from both private and public sectors, Dr. Hanson integrates a psychoeducational approach, which turns challenges into opportunities for growth. Her work is grounded in a deep commitment to mental health and a belief in power of personal transformation. Thank you again so much for being here. I have to ask you, what is psychoeducational approach?
Well, the psychoeducational approach really takes into account what's happening with the client internally, but also begins to build some skills that can help them actually have some executive functioning that maybe helps them do better in their day-to-day world. So we do some work talking about feelings and thoughts and all of that, because I certainly come from a cognitive approach, which I can talk about later. But ultimately, we have to do something. The antidote to anxiety is action. And so we have to do something to help ourselves feel better. And so that's really that psychoeducational approach. We take two approaches. Yes, we're going to talk about what's going on inside and what's happening in your relationships. And then we're going to offer some strategies to help improve the way things are going, ideally.
That phrase, action is the antidote to anxiety. Wow, that really hit me like a ton of bricks. But sometimes taking that first step to make action can be so difficult.
Yeah, that it's an easy phrase to say, but it's really difficult to do, because what happens when we live with stress or long-term anxiety over time, which certainly happens to us in the LGBTQI community, especially in red states. And we can talk about all the things that are happening in Texas right now. I'm sure you guys are following that. Is that we actually live in our amygdala brain, the stress brain, which is reactive, and then it goes from stress to anxiety. So our frontal lobe is not doing all the work to help us make good decisions, and we just stay in the spinning, which just leads us down a path that's not helpful, and then can lead to the depression and all of the other things that happen. So we really work to try to help clients move into the frontal lobe of what can we do to help us quiet that anxious brain and get that frontal lobe activated again, because rightfully so, we've been living under the stress for so long. And I get it, but it's hard. It's not easy. It's much easier to talk about than to actually do.
I can relate to the spinning. Absolutely. That hits me too.
We all can. We all can. Yes.
So what drew you to specialize in LGBTQ plus mental health, and how has that focus kind of shaped the way you approach counseling?
Well, my involvement with the LGBTQ community started over 30 years ago with actually in CC Dallas. And they had at the time a very small little, we called it the Pink Church, right? And in the South, churches are everything. And our community is often isolated from their spiritual growth, their spiritual path. And and so they had this little church, and they did a wonderful job of building community. It was what they did, and they did it so well. And from that, I really began to understand how important connection and this radical self-acceptance is for all of us. We are not as humans meant to survive in isolation. And as a community, we're often isolated, especially in a rural community. I live in a rural community, and it is we're isolated, and it's a very difficult process. And so Dr. Ramirez talked about community and how important community is. I cannot reiterate that enough. And that was the beginning of how important I knew our mental health. And we didn't talk about mental health in the 90s, right? We were dealing with a physiological health, AIDS crisis, and all of the things. And but the community was so important during that time and continues to be the foundation of what will help us get through this crisis as well. And I do see it as a crisis, by the way. I mean, I'm living it every day in Texas. So
It, you talk about isolation, and it feels like between the pandemic and then what we have walked into in the last year or so, especially since the new year, it seems kind of like a perfect storm for all of this to be happening.
hmm I agree. And I think what happened in the pandemic is those of us that or the isolation began to be normalized. So it was okay to stay home. It was okay to get involved in our phones and in our in our own head all the time because we were literally isolated. And sometimes in our community, we were isolated with people who really didn't accept us. Many of our youth, for example, were isolated with their family,
Right.
which is sort of in some ways the worst case scenario. And so it became what happened is we actually became more internal and less externally focused. And I what we do in my practice is really work at helping people have this idea of I can be okay, and it's necessary that I reach out and do this in tandem with other people.
That makes a lot of sense. And in your practice, you emphasize this authentic connection. How do you
Mhm.
define that? And why is it especially important for your LGBTQ plus clients?
Because it could be an authentic connection means a relationship of trust and unconditional acceptance. And it could be our client's very first experience for that. It could be their first experience of having someone truly actively listen to what's happening with them and be able to identify, maybe on some level in a professional way, with what they're going through, and have someone that actually they can rely on without judgment. And that authentic connection is what can actually help the client authentically connect to themselves so that they're no longer relying on the external feedback of others
Hmm.
to determine their worth.
Where that's so
If
hard to
that
shut
helps.
off, right?
So hard because we're socialized to really look at, especially with all the social media, we are socialized to take this feedback. And and our youth right now are have this inundation of the feedback, and they're not able to process it. So you look at some of the feedback maybe that I get online, and it's hard. Sometimes I look at it and I go, ouch, that really hurt. And I am old, so I mean, imagine what it's like for a 12 or 13 or
Right.
15-year-old to have to process that
Right.
feedback. So we really try to get all of our clients to a point that they are okay with themselves in their current po- position. They don't have to change anything, they don't have to do anything differently, just because of their very being, that they are wonderfully created in their beingness, and it's a good thing. And this could be their very first experience with that.
And you
So
talk
that's
about,
what that authentic.
oh, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. There, you have a
No, I
tiny you
interrupted.
have
Go
a
ahead.
tiny lag on your video there. So
Welcome to rural internet.
um, you talked really when we first started off, like being in Texas right now, it's incredibly
Mhm,
difficult, especially for trans and
mhm.
gender non-conforming kids. Like it must be even bigger of a roadblock to be able to get to your authentic self or entrust your authentic self when you're hearing legislators say that we want to make this illegal, we want to make it more difficult for trans folks to be able to do this or that. How do you counter the noise?
So one of the things that I do personally, and we really work with our clients to do, is to really stay in the present rather than getting too far ahead of ourselves. Now we have to be aware and we have to be prepared. We're not ostriches. We're not going to stick our heads in
Sure.
the sand. But we do need to be really present to what is actually happening right now, because the anxious brain will get us way ahead of ourselves, and then we'll go down a rabbit hole that is not productive, and it actually prevents us from taking action, which, as I said earlier, can lead to all the depression, right?
Right.
So when I said that action is the antidote to anxiety, community is the antidote to depression.
Mm.
So what we do is really help people stay connected to what is happening now. What do I need to do right this minute? So with the transgender state document thing that just happened with Ken Paxton, what do we need to do right now to protect ourselves? And in Texas, for example, I'm now prepared to carry all those power of attorneys and all those documents that I used to carry a long time ago before 2015, right? Because we
Sure.
don't know
Yes.
what's going. So we're staying in the present, but being prepared, um, but also living in what's actually now. And I can't emphasize that enough because it's so important. Um, so we really work at that, helping them stay in their frontal lobe logical brain rather than all the what ifs, because that's just not helpful.
Absolutely. And we're talking about Texas youth, LGBT youth, but you also work with parents. What guidance
Yes.
have you been trying to give to those to support their LGBTQ plus children while also navigating their own emotions?
Hmm. Well, one of the things I really work with parents on is helping them first become a good listener. And as parents, sometimes we just are not very good at it, right? We want to interject and we want to tell them all the things and we want to coach them and all the things. So one of the things I do immediately is help them understand, how do I as a parent become a good listener and just receive the information that my child is giving me without judging it as good or bad, without needing to correct it or lead them down a path that could take them, because as parents we want our kids to be successful, right? Very few parents wake up and say, oh, I really want to see if I can screw my kid up today. They don't want to do that. So if they can be coached on how to become a good listener, how to provide resources for their student or their child. How I work with teachers and educators too, not as much in Texas anymore. And how to help their child, give the child the resources that they may need, how to also build community for their child, because at school it's very likely that they're isolated, so that they can then become an advocate for their child rather than an adversary. And sometimes we have to work on the religious trauma that may have happened along the way, because that's a real issue with our families, especially in the South. So we have to work on some of the family values and the lost dreams and the grief of what could have been or what we wish had happened, and the reconciling with what God's going to do about this.
Right. Right. You know that that's something a lot of LGBTQ plus people think about, but I hadn't even thought about the fact that it's also something a lot of parents to LGBTQ plus kids think about as well. So this has been incredibly insightful. I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I've got one more question for you. What would you say to LGBTQ plus individuals who are hesitant to seek therapy or mental health support?
I would say that they can reach out. One of the things that happens, I think, in therapy is sometimes there's not a great fit with the first counselor or the first therapist, and so then people are hesitant, or they don't want to bare their soul, or they don't want to talk about how they were toilet trained. So I think it's.
Uh-oh. Looks like Dr. Hanson may have frozen here. Let's try real quick. Just going to see if we can do some troubleshooting real quick. We may have lost Dr. Hanson here, but thank you so much to Dr. Hanson for being here and for sharing your wisdom. That's Hanson Counseling in Texas. So if you are in Texas, and we will provide all of the links to these amazing individuals in the notes, in the comments for on YouTube and Facebook. So sorry we didn't get an official goodbye, Dr. Hanson, but thank you so much for being here with us today. And we are going to bring in our last guest, Dr. Levounis. Are you good? You're good. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to bring you up here and give you a little introduction.
Can you hear me just fine?
I can hear you just wonderful.
Oh,
Thank you so much
great.
for being here. So, I mean, it's hard to give just a brief bio on you because you've had such a storied career. But Dr. Petros Levounis is the past president of the American Psychiatric Association, the recent past president, and serves as a professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Rutgers. He's also chief of service at University Hospital in Newark, and previously directed the Addiction Institute of New York and Columbia University. He is trained in psychiatry at Columbia and completed an addiction psychiatry fellowship at NYU, and you've published extensively on addiction and psychiatry. You've offered 11 books with the APA and have been featured in
I'm like that.
You're like that. And has been featured in major media outlets. We are so glad to have you here with us, Doctor. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Well, as the past president of the APA, how has the psychiatric field evolved in addressing LGBTQ plus mental health? Because where we've seen progress, there's still work to be done, right?
Yes. The main thing that we have accomplished in recent years is build an evidence-based body of knowledge, an evidence-based literature on LGBTQ mental health. Back in the day, in the 1990s, when we started the first LGBTQ mental health clinic in the country, we were flying by the seat of our pants, essentially. But in 2025, we do have great studies. We have evidence-based. We know that we have vulnerable populations. We know what to do about it. We have targeted interventions, psychotherapies. We know how to do it. So that's a huge plus. What still needs to be done, though, is to bring all this knowledge down to the everyday practice of primary care physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health counselors, addiction counselors, the general public. So this is the major work that still needs to be done.
Interesting. Very interesting. We talk about stigma and minority stress impact on mental health and addiction in the LGBTQ community. What needs to change to better support those who are affected by this?
Yeah, when we think about minority stress theory in LGBTQ populations, we think about overt discrimination, flat out, I'm gay, I'm being discriminated against. We think about the perception or expectation of discrimination, and that in itself is enough to give you stress that can very well lead into some kind of mental illness. What I'm saying here is that you enter a room and everybody may be cool, everybody may be gay friendly, gay celebratory, gay affirmative, but if I expect that I'm going to be discriminated against, if I perceive people to be homophobic, this is enough stress for me to suffer the consequences. And the third component of that is the internalized homophobia. I know we've talked a lot about internalized homophobia, but it is perhaps the most sinister part of minority stress, because not only other people hate me, but I end up hating myself. What we add to this with addiction is the idea of self-medication. So you may have all this stress that leads to some kind of mental problem or frank out psychiatric disorder, and then you try to self-medicate this uncomfortable feeling with whatever substance there is or a behavioral addiction, and that of course gets the person to even more trouble. So that's how we understand the minority stress theory in our populations in 2025.
That's really, I like that you brought up like this inward homophobia that some of us experience. I mean, probably everyone who has come out at some point in time has experienced this. Like, how are you able to tackle that? Like because it just feels so deep and ingrained. So how do you disentangle that feeling, that loathing from like what our previous guest said of like loving your authentic self and and experiencing joy as a queer or trans person?
Yeah, that's a lifetime worth of work, actually. The way that, first of all, is recognizing homophobia. I live in Chelsea, Manhattan, with my husband, and it's really a bubble, and we're all very happy here. And just stop for a moment and think outside our Chelsea, Manhattan lovely little apartment, what is the world out there, and the rampant homophobia that people experience in other parts of the country and, of course, other parts of the world. So this is a huge part of a starting point. But how do we combat this homophobia, and more specifically the internalized homophobia? I like the idea of being authentic to yourself. This is an important piece of it. But also, do not attribute everything that's going on in your life to being gay. I've come across quite a few, not only patients, but friends, colleagues, and whatever trouble they may have in life, they link it to sexual orientation, sexual identity. Yes, it's part of it. It's a very big part of our lives, but it's not the only thing. There are a bunch of other kind of disasters that can happen and that can influence our lives and make us struggle.
Well, you are also an educator in addition to working directly with patients. What's missing in education and professional development? What's missing when it comes to training mental health professionals to effectively serve LGBTQ plus patients?
Two major things there. One is to educate our future physicians, our future nurse practitioners, our counselors, our fellow professionals about that evidence-based that I mentioned before, about the studies, about what we know about LGBTQ mental health, the unique aspects of coming out, the unique aspects of same-gender parenting. All that body of knowledge needs to be given to our students. So that's one major thing. But the other one is also to normalize LGBTQ populations throughout the study of medicine, which I know best, actually. What I mean by that is you go into exam And as soon as you see an LGBTQ patient, then your mind immediately goes into a set of preconceived notions about what an LGBTQ person would be like. What we would like to see is to have generic questions throughout, like, lesbians with diabetes and, gay men with hypertension, and
Sure.
just be part of our everyday curriculum. I see sometimes our medical students put down a problem list, and they have one, depression, two, thyroid disease, three, LGBTQ. Like, it's not a problem in the problem list. It's just something that really needs to be embedded throughout our education. All this being said, I think the task for a student is twofold. On one hand, you need to educate yourself. You need to learn all that stuff that I just talked about. But when you are in front of a patient, you have to put all that aside and connect with the patient. I've seen way too many medical students who freeze in front of a transgender patient in fear of saying the wrong thing, of using the wrong pronoun. And what they do is they don't connect.
Right.
So, yes, educate yourself, but at the very moment, let it rip, connect with your patient. If you make a mistake, you use the wrong pronoun, so be it. Oops, you apologize, then you move on.
Got it. So that, putting aside that your own fear helps you make a better connection with your patient. I love that. I hope more people get this education, Dr. Levounis.
I hope so too.
Your most recent book, Nature Therapy.
Mm-hmm.
How can nature-based approaches help support the LGBTQ plus mental health and recovery?
Yeah, what we see there, what we really focus on is urban spaces. When people hear about nature therapy, they think about forest bathing and taking expensive vacations and going to these exotic places to connect with nature. Yes, this is part of it, but a huge part of it is urban spaces where a lot of LGBTQ people live. And you can choose to take a path from home to work through a park instead of going through a concrete wall. Bring some of nature into your own apartment. As I mentioned before, I live in New York City, so we know very, very well about how difficult it is to connect with nature when you're in such a metropolis.
Not a lot of trees in Chelsea, right?
But there are ways of doing that, and also there are bodies of water. There are ways of connecting with nature, even in the most urban environment. Of course, this is particularly relevant to LGBTQ people who tend to live in urban centers.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yes, a majority of enclaves in large cities are not really surrounded by nature, and that is a lot of LGBT people. When I was in New York, I certainly didn't get a lot of nature, and I'm in the Pacific Northwest now, so I'm immersed in nature therapy.
Wonderful. I did my 10 years in California, and I miss it very much.
My final question, and it's a little overlapping with one of my previous questions, but in the field in general, in the psychiatric field, not just doctors, how do we make affirming care more accessible, particularly for LGBTQ people of marginalized communities?
Okay. Of course, when you're in your own office, it's a one-to-one relationship with your patient, and you can provide the best possible care that you can at that time. But it goes beyond the office, beyond the one-on-one interaction. You have to work on the clinic space, making it a welcoming area for the patient. As I mentioned before, we started the first LGBTQ mental health clinic in the country in the 1990s. And although we had the best people that we could possibly think of populating that clinic, and we had great space and all that, the clinic failed. And the clinic failed because we had some highly homophobic people in the waiting room, being the attendants there, and they scared the people away. So it's not enough to just be a good counselor, a good physician, a good mental health provider. You need to take some care of the spaces around you, make it a welcoming environment for the patient, and be explicit about it. What I mean by that, put some pamphlets out there in the waiting room. Wear perhaps a rainbow flag. make sure that people know that you are LGBTQ affirmative, that you are an ally. A lot of my straight friends say, okay, I am very, I'm an ally to the LGBTQ communities, and that's enough. It's not enough.
Right.
You really need to show it, because people expect less from you. So this is what really still needs to be done.
I always say that being an ally is an action. So I like that
Yes,
you, yes.
that's
Well,
that's a great way to put it.
thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. This has been an incredible conversation. I'm just checking to see if we got any questions. No, we're good. Where can people find your books? They're available on the APA website. Is there anywhere that they should be looking to connect with nature, perhaps?
At the end of the day, whatever feelings you may have about it, Amazon.com is the easiest way to find anything that you may want, and any book you want, and all of them are available there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and best to you. And thank you. I'm going to send you back now.
Thank you
And
so much. Thank you for
wishing
having
you.
me here.
Thank you so much.
Great work doing for us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much to all of our guests today, Dr. Hanson, Dr. Ramirez, Dr. Levounis. What an incredible conversation. Your mental health matters. That's why we decided to do this. I want to thank all of our publication sponsors, the members of News is Out, Bay Area Reporter, Dallas Voice, Los Angeles Blade, Philadelphia Gay News, Tag Magazine, Washington Blade, and Windy City Times. I want to thank my colleague Michel, who's been backstage, so you don't see him, but he's been backstage doing everything. And of course, our colleague Penny, and all of the members of News is Out for their help promoting this event. I hope all of you enjoyed this and got something out of it. We appreciate you, and thanks for tuning in, and check us out at newsisout.com. Good health to you all.